This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. Today, Professor Desiree LaBeaud tells us why the proliferation of plastic trash in sub-Saharan Africa has a huge impact on diseases transmitted by mosquitoes. She will tell us that the plastics we use, even here in the U.S., wind up causing health problems around the world. It's the future of mosquito-borne diseases. When we think of diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes, of course, malaria is the first that comes to mind. And rightly so. Millions of people, primarily children, die each year from malaria in Africa and other developing parts of the world. But there are other important diseases, chikungunya, dengue, Zika, yellow fever, for example, that also are mosquito-borne, different mosquitoes. They also cause great mortality and morbidity, and also children are their primary victims. There are no good antiviral medications for these viruses, so control of the mosquitoes is the main strategy for reducing their impact. So you need to know how they live, where they live, and how to modify your environment so that it's less hospitable to the mosquitoes. Desiree LaBeaud is a professor of pediatrics, epidemiology, and population health at Stanford University. She is an expert on mosquito-borne viruses called arboviruses, and she partners with researchers in Africa to understand the tremendous impact of these and other diseases on children's health. Somewhat surprisingly, the future of these viruses can be stated in one word: plastics. Desiree, you're an expert at mosquito-borne diseases. So why has plastics become a key focus of your research?
Well, it's great to be here, Russ. Thank you. So I've been studying mosquito-borne viral diseases for about 20 years, in Kenya mainly, but in other places in the world too, like Grenada and in the Caribbean and also Brazil. But in Kenya, we started out just trying to understand the great burden of these viruses, because most of the time in sub-Saharan Africa, when a child or an adult comes in with fever, people automatically think of malaria, right? So they're not thinking about these other viruses that can be caused by different types of mosquitoes. And so I started off just as an epidemiologist in infectious disease, trying to figure out what is the burden of these infections. And we found a great burden, right? Whenever you look for something, oftentimes you find it, right? So we found a lot of these diseases. And so we were sort of mapping out the diseases, trying to understand how they transmit. And then we got to the point where once we knew about this great burden, sort of the risk factors and the long-term health consequences of these infections, we wanted to start preventing, right? So we went out into the community, and we started working with community members, mothers and families, and also school kids. And we developed this whole curriculum to try and teach children about the different types of mosquitoes, some that carry malaria, others that carry these arboviruses or mosquito-borne viruses. And so we had a very innovative curriculum designed by actually a graduate student at Stanford, Jenna Forsythe. And we went out and kind of showed the kids all these different mosquito life stages. You know, when they're in larva form, they're like these little wormy things in the water. And we showed the kids and we said, okay, now your homework is on this lesson on Monday, go out and find these mosquitoes in your community. And so they came back the next day, we found them. And we said, well, where did you find them? And they said, in all the plastic trash that's behind our households. And so Jenna and I knew, oh, we've got a big problem, right? And we had been doing a lot of vector work along with our human work, but we didn't realize the scale to which the trash problem was impacting the transmission of these diseases. And so then we set a course to design a lot of different research projects, and now a new nonprofit sort of focused on this plastic problem.
So when you say the plastics in their backyard, were they like creating little ponds of water, like because of the rain, and then the plastic creates a little tiny like 5-inch pond of water, and that's where the mosquito larvae were, or is it different?
Exactly. No, exactly. So as we all know, plastics don't biodegrade, right? They sit there for eternity. And so what happens is, you know, there are a lot of different containers that people use in Kenya because, again, there's no safe, reliable access to clean water, which is a problem. We're going to talk a lot about global health inequities today. But you know, people are forced to have these containers. And, you know, sometimes they're just containers in their backyard that they're kind of holding because they don't have access to water, and they're uncovered. So they're breeding mosquitoes. And we've actually found in our work that these kind of non-purpose containers, the ones that are in people's backyards where they don't have a purpose for them, or just the trash, the plastic trash laying around the street, it just sits there. And then when it rains, it fills with water. And these mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, which are the ones that actually spread these arboviruses like dengue and chikungunya and Zika and yellow fever, they only need about a tablespoon of water to breed in. So if you get a little tablespoon of water stuck in a plastic water bottle, right, that's enough to cause those mosquitoes to breed, and they can be quite abundant.
Okay, so this is great. So now, if it's okay, I just want to step back and get a little tutorial about these mosquito-borne illnesses. You just mentioned some big headline viruses that many of us have heard about. But so first of all, I guess one question is, you mentioned in your prior comments that there are multiple species of mosquitoes that are problematic. So we always do think about malaria. You're right, of course. Those of us in the West who aren't in these places. But it sounds like there's a whole spectrum of mosquitoes that bring different diseases. And then also, can you you said them very quickly. What are the ones that really cause the most problems for the community in terms of the viral illnesses?
Okay, well, all of them. First, let me just say, mosquitoes, number one, the most deadly animal in the world, right? Killing 750, to millions of people per year, right? Okay, so let's start there.
Wow. Yes.
There are three types of mosquitoes that I think about often. There's Anopheles, right? Anopheles are the genus that actually spread malaria, right? They're night-biting mosquitoes. So those mosquito nets protect you from malaria, which is most of what vector control and prevention is for these diseases in sub-Saharan Africa. It's the distribution of an insecticide-treated net. Because the mosquito bites you at night, it offers you protection. There's Culex mosquitoes, which are common worldwide too, and they spread like West Nile virus, which is our most common arbovirus here in the US. And they also spread other infections like Rift Valley fever virus, which is really important and something that I study. And then the one I mentioned is Aedes aegypti. The deal with Aedes aegypti is she's a very bad girl because she is a very efficient promoter of human disease. She prefers to bite in the daytime, right? So that net is not going to protect you. She is very anthropophilic, so she loves to feed on humans, right? So if you're there and she was born in your backyard and you're there to feed on, she'll never leave you, right? She'll just stay there feeding on you for her life. And she's kind of a nervous feeder. So oftentimes it takes several people for her to get a full blood meal. And so she can spread whatever disease she's carrying to all of those people. Okay. And so again, because it's a day biter, you can't use that net to protect people, right? You have to actually do what's called larval source reduction, which is getting rid of the containers where she breeds. And so that's what we're focused on.
Great. So do we have strategy? So what is the strategy for controlling these non-night biting mosquitoes? Because it's now you have me all in. I see that this is a huge problem. The nets aren't going to solve the problem. What do we have to do?
Yeah. So a lot of it is education, right? People need to know about this first and foremost, right? We need to be able to know that these diseases are circulating in the healthcare systems. We need to be able to diagnose them, right? There's no specific antiviral, but dengue is a huge killer of children worldwide, right? There's at least 400 million cases of dengue per year in the world, right? And so a lot of children die from dengue in many parts of the world. And so you need to be able to know you have dengue so that you can effectively care for those children in the clinic. So education of the community. And then when you get physical about it, what behaviors do you need to do? You need to protect yourself from getting mosquito bites, right? That can include, of course, wearing, protective clothing, wearing mosquito repellent. But a big part of it is larval source reduction, which is cleaning up your backyard and the areas where you work or schools, and actually dumping out all that standing water and dog dishes or flower pots or what have you, and actually not allowing those mosquitoes to breed around you.
So like many parts of medicine, it sounds like you can't just see the individual patient in the clinic and send them off. There has to be community engagement. And I know that you work with schools, you work with households, and that's critical because the cleanup is not just going to happen if at the clinic you say, well, it's nice to see you, please go home and clean up your trash, right? It has to be a much more, I would guess. And how do that, so my question is, how do these communities and households respond? Some of these folks may have a lot of things on their mind. They might have food insecurity or water insecurity. So how can is it hard to get them to prioritize this?
Yes, and again, I think the community piece is a part of this, right? You need community empowerment and education, and you need community buy-in because people really can change sort of the trajectory of health for themselves and their family members and even their neighbors if they do these things on larval source reduction. But in our work, actually working with communities, if we just leave it to the individual, that's not really fair, right? Because there need to be processes like structures and really that support appropriate community behavior. One of the problems
Right.
we found in our communities, there's too many containers to be able to deal with, right? Because they have all these containers because again, they don't have safe, reliable access to clean water, right? So that's a big structural problem that needs to get fixed, right? Then there wouldn't be all these containers laying around breeding. There's no recycling in Kenya, right? There's no recycling, there's no formal recycling trade. And so there's no place to put all that trash, right? Where does it go? It just ends up sitting there because also the sanitation, it hasn't kept up with the growth of communities, right? And so you do have this buildup of plastic trash around. So we need better sanitation, better pickup, a place for all these things to go that are away from the community members so they can sit there. And then we need alternatives, right? We know that plastic isn't effectively recycled. We know recycling is not the silver bullet. It's not the thing that's going to save the world. But we need to do something with all that plastic that's laying around and then have alternatives so we're using less of it, so less of it keeps building up.
I mean, on that note, I notice you have a couple of papers where I believe the title includes something like "Collecting Trash for Profit." And you can see immediately why that might change the dynamic that you just described. So tell me about that work.
Yeah, for sure. So it's one thing to clean up because, you want to protect you and your family's health. That's a very important motivator, right, for people. Absolutely. But it is nice, especially in a place where, you have up to 40% unemployment. It would be nice to actually be able to have some sort of job or some kind of income related to this plastic upcycling. And so we've realized that we had a project funded through building out vector-borne diseases in Africa. And so this was a project that was called really, yeah, exactly what you said, trash for treasure, right? Trash becomes treasure. And so we actually started working with these yard shop operators in the informal plastic trade in Kenya. So I mentioned there's no formal plastic recycling in Kenya, but of course there's an informal plastic recycling trade. And so we started working with these yard shop operators, which are folks in the neighborhoods that collect a lot of this trash, kind of clean it, sort it, and then sell it to middlemen who then go on and sell it to big factories or gets shipped abroad and so forth. And so, these yard shop operators are actually sitting in the neighborhoods where our community members are.
Right,
and if they're not properly covering their plastic, they can actually be a huge mosquito breeding factory for their neighborhoods. And so we worked with them to help them with their business model, understand their barriers to what was, going on, why their businesses weren't as successful as they could be. We made a lot of connections and partnerships with them and the government authorities to help kind of smooth the way, and really are trying to change some policy because we need policies that enable this kind of work and actually promote it. And from all of that work, we've actually now launched a nonprofit called the Health and Environmental Research Institute Kenya, which works with all these policymakers and scientists and community members to try to circularize an economy of plastic waste. Because we think if we can kind of, improve the economy and improve health at the same time, we're going to get a much bigger buy-in and much bigger impact.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, what has been the governmental response at the different levels, local and nationwide? Is this are you getting support from the government, or is this in some way creating tensions for them? Because, life is complicated, and when you turn a knob, a lot of times many other knobs get turned. So what's been the response to this from leadership?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's created tension. I mean, I think in general, people know across the world that this is a problem, right? And one that we're going to have to deal with. And I think that, we have buy-in from our local leaders. Again, with that nonprofit, we work a lot with them. And there's actually movement at the national level in Kenya also. Kenya's actually very forward-thinking when it comes to environmental issues. They banned plastic bags in 2017. They've already banned plastic water bottles in the game parks. And there's a lot of policy going on now, a lot of talk about really increasing end producer responsibility, right? So the big manufacturers who are making all these plastic water bottles or bringing all this plastic in, that they have to be responsible for picking that much up or dealing with it, doing something with it, upcycling it, recycling it, something. And so there's these policies that are going through at the government level. And, policy, it's a slow moving train, right? A lot of this work is, community empowerment, education, healthcare, all of these systems takes time. But I actually am really hopeful at this stage. I think that there's a lot that can be done at the local level that can boost things locally for the local economy, where we're working in Diani in Kenya. But also, I think there's a lot of buy-in at the upper levels. And there's a lot of partnerships happening between industry, and the government, so that, the industry is also interested in, in also doing something important for our planet here, because they don't want to pollute the planet either.
It strikes me that you must have spent, you said you've been working on these diseases for many, many years. It must be incredibly important for you to gain the trust and the relationships locally on the ground in order to do all this. And so that must be a main part of your effort, as my guess is establishing and maintaining good relationships, because I could imagine if you just helicoptered in and said, hey, I'm a fancy infectious disease expert from Stanford and here's what you should do, and then you helicopter out, that might not work.
Yeah, so that's the way things used to be, right? That's colonialism. We're trying to decolonize global health now. Absolutely. Right. Building trust and rapport and actually having all the key stakeholders there at the very beginning to decide what needs to be done, what the needs are of the community, and working together to produce all of it is how everything needs to happen in the world, right? I think, yes, I hope what comes out of it, lots of relationships, right? The relationships are absolutely fundamental to building trust and respect and being able to share ideas and having a psychologically safe space. When things go wrong, you can repair and just everything. And so I've been working in Kenya, like I said, for about 20 years. And the people who I founded the nonprofit with are my two long-standing research collaborators, Dr. Bryson and Dengue and Dr. Francis Matuku. And so, we also care deeply about this community and want to see it thrive along with the planet. And so it works really well because we know each other and we trust each other. And I think, all of this work is done through Kenyans. I'm just a spokesperson here, right? I get to participate. I'm honored to be part of it. But all of the work is actually done by locals in Kenya who care about these things and have done all of this epidemiology work, the infectious disease work. And so because of that, there is a lot of buy-in. And it's not me going there and trying to do this alone. No, never.
This is The Future of Everything with Russ Altman. More with Desiree LaBeaud next. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, and I'm speaking with Professor Desiree LaBeaud of Stanford University. In the last segment, Desiree told us how macro or large plastics create little pools of water as small as a tablespoon that can support mosquito larvae, which of course grow up to be mosquitoes and transmit disease. In this segment, Desiree will describe how plastics more generally represent a huge health challenge in other ways, including microscopic fragments of plastic. Now, plastics have only been used widely for about 65 years, but have already found their way into the bodies of the food that we eat and in our own bodies. She will tell us that some emerging technologies may help us get on top of the plastic problem. Plastics seems to be on a lot of people's minds, and it seems to be having lots of health consequences. I know you care about this. From your perspective, what are the big issues for plastics?
Yeah, so we've been talking about plastics, sort of macroplastics, and how they can provide breeding sites for mosquitoes. They can do a lot of other things too, rodents, right? They provide breeding sites for a lot of vermin that can cause human disease in general. Also important to know, in many parts of the world, including where I work in sub-Saharan Africa and Kenya, about 75% of plastic laying around is burned. Okay, so about 600 million tons of plastic worldwide is burned every single year. And so that leads to a lot of air pollution. About 6 million people die from air pollution every year. So that's a major cost for human health. Of course, we know plastics make their way into everything, right? The waterways, the oceans, and so of course it's choking marine food chains, right? That can lead to food security issues. Of course, biodiversity loss. We depend on our oceans for our lives. And then now there's a lot of talk also about microplastics, right? The plastic that we have everywhere ends up breaking down into these very fine particles that we can find all over the place, even inside our bodies, right? And
Yes,
so
yes.
plastic itself can attract a lot of pollutants. It's hydrophobic, and so it can attract pollutants, and so it can be kind of a vehicle to get these other bad things into your body. And so that's also a concern. So plastic in the macro sense and also in the micro sense can be harmful to human health. And there's still a lot of research that needs to be done about what all the microplastic harms are for humans and other species.
And the plastic industry is not that old. I mean, I think it's like 100 years
No,
old or less.
1955. No, yes.
1955. So it's 50 years or 60 years old.
I always show, when I give a talk, I show this picture. It's the Life magazine, the cover of Life magazine. And it's, this family is rejoicing with all this disposable plastic around them, the happiness of convenient living sort of thing. But since 1955, it's just been an exponential increase in the amount of plastic.
A great scene in the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman, where
exactly.
he gets advice. He gets advice about plastics.
He was right, because it turns out like all of these oil companies, because of course plastic is made from oil, they are making a lot of money off of making virgin plastic products, and many of those are single-use products. And that's really the problem here, because they can't be recycled. That was really a lie, right? It doesn't make sense to recycle plastic because it's so cheap to make virgin, plastic items off of oil. And so, the profit lines suggest that you just keep making new products, not trying to figure out how to recycle. So really less than 9% of the world's plastic is actually recycled. And that's a big problem, because we just keep using more and more of it, and more and more of it keeps being made. So
wow. Okay, yeah. So and I'm sure. So the burning thing, I don't know if I fully appreciated that. So they're just burning it to get rid of it, right? There's just no place to put it, so they burn it.
It's just going to sit there breeding mosquitoes, or causing problems, blocking the road.
And I'm sure that has and then I'm sure that has health consequences both for children but for everybody in terms of airway disease and things like this. So
absolutely.
Is your nonprofit taking up that entire challenge, or are you focusing on the things?
A lot of challenges. Yes. So we are trying to circularize circularize an economy of plastic waste through a lot of education, empowerment, bringing on a lot of youth, women-led businesses, and so forth, to try and tackle this problem. Really, sustainability on the whole, and how health of the people and health of the planet are intricately linked. And I guess we really believe that. Oh yeah. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was going to say, what can people here sitting? I mean, you're describing some it's a very arousing, like, oh my goodness, I want to do something. Can somebody sitting in California or New York or Minnesota, do we have options in our choices that can actually help the situation in Kenya?
Absolutely. So just with COVID, right, the world saw once again how very interconnected we all are, right? How something that seems to be happening so far away and seems so far away can actually really impact your life for many, many years, right? And so the same is true here. So although I'm talking about what's going on in Kenya, what we do here in the US really makes a huge difference. I don't know if people know this in general, but a lot of our plastic actually gets shipped out to poorer nations for them to deal with our plastic waste. And it sits there breeding mosquitoes and vermin and making people sick, because we're using so much of it here, and we can't deal with our waste either. So we end up shipping it out.
So you're saying that when I obsessive compulsively separate out my recycling and create a big pile of plastic that's picked up every Tuesday, there's a little bit of hocus pocus going on. That's all not going to recycling actually?
Unfortunately, no. And I think there's actually a recent study where they actually GPS some plastic that they thought was getting recycled, and it ended up in like Vietnam or someplace. So no. So yes, some of it's getting recycled. I'm here in San Mateo. We have Recology. I appreciate all the efforts, but not all of it, not what you think.
It's very confusing because they have those little triangles with numbers, and I think that has something to do with whether or not it's going to be recycled, but I have no understanding of it.
Again, it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier about putting all the responsibility on the individual, right? Like when we were talking about cleaning up your backyard, right? It's not just about that. It's about having systems and structures in place to make this stuff work. And we were told that those little triangles meant everything was recyclable, and it was up to the consumer to make sure you put it in the right bin, and then everything's going to be hunky-dory, but that's not true. And it's not getting recycled. Less than 10% of the world's plastic, even here in the US, gets recycled. And so it ends up polluting and harming people who are impoverished and dealing with poverty inequities and health inequities in other parts of the world. So what can we do, you asked me?
Yes,
I think okay, so let me tell you what we can do. We can, number one, recognize that we have agency here, that our choices really do make a difference. Local is global, okay? So what can I do? I live in San Mateo. What can I do? Well, I can definitely try to use less plastic, right? Avoid any single-use plastic items. I can try to find plastic alternatives, right? I can support technology that is working towards plastic alternatives, right? I can vote, right? I can make my voice heard, knowing that, you know, the environment and people's health across the world is important to me, right? And make choices in my legislature that will help promote policies that enable, you know, more technology advancement, less, you know, less exportation of plastic, dealing with it ourselves. And I can talk about it. I can talk to other people, right? Who maybe know less, and try and find communities, right? Humans do better when we kind of co-localize along a shared vision, right? So the shared vision is here. Let's improve our health locally here and globally, and improve the health of our planet by saying no to single-use plastics, which are really polluting all of us.
And which we now have learned we'll get on a boat ride to Vietnam if we don't do it. Well, let me ask you. You and I are both sitting in Silicon Valley right now. I happen to know. What about technology? I mean, I don't want to wave technology as a cure-all for everything, but can you tell me, are there realistic technological opportunities to help this problem?
Absolutely. I believe so. So I think plastic alternatives are huge, right? We've gotten used to, since 1955s, right? We're that happy American family on Life magazine. We've gotten used to the convenience of disposable items and single-use things and all of that, right? And so I'm in healthcare too, right? And so healthcare is a huge harbinger of greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so, you know, all the plastics and single-use items, what can we do? Well, we can find alternatives to those. I think technology and technological advancements, right, for dealing with the plastic problem, finding alternatives is huge. There's something that I have had my eye on, just that this is kind of related to our nonprofit, but there's actually a biodigestive cell. So bacteria chew up, you know, things and make energy. Okay. So there's actually a bacterium that was found in the trash heaps of Japan that can actually chew up PET plastic, which is your plastic water bottle plastic. And it makes energy, which can be harnessed to power what I want to power is an aquaponics unit to improve sustainable fishing practices in Kenya. But it also makes this fertilizer, right? And so you can actually, you know, kind of think about ways to upcycle this problem as well, right? Using technology. I think there can be technological advancements on the education part of this, right? Getting education out to many people, right? On social media or on other apps, or, you know, so people know what to do with their plastic or what the alternatives are. And then we're actually using some technology in some of our research studies where we're using drones to try and map out the trash problem, where we're working in Kenya, and see if we can find thresholds and, you know, kind of the life cycle of plastic and what happens to it and when it becomes a problem, and you know, how close it is to communities, and you know, using modeling and technology to understand
that sounds incredibly positive. Like that GPS story you told about Vietnam, and especially now if you add in drones and imagery, because this shines sunshine on the problem, and then you can say somebody needs to explain to me why my recycled bottle wound up in this place that I wasn't expecting it to, and so you could imagine that kind of data leading to accountability. I mean, I don't want to be unrealistic about it, but the you know, hard images like that seem to be they would be very important, and then you could also follow progress. Are things getting better or things getting worse? Thanks to Desiree LaBeaud. That was the future of mosquito-borne illness. You have been listening to The Future of Everything with Russ Altman.